If you want to find the most dangerous thing on a modern construction site,
Yeah.
don't look up at the towering cranes. And, don't look over at the high voltage wires. You really just need to look straight down at your own boots.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the reality of workplace danger, when you strip away the, Hollywood-style spectacles and the slow-motion explosions, it's remarkably mundane. And honestly, because it's so mundane, it is incredibly destructive.
It really is. The hazards that actually send people to the hospital or, worse, they're quiet. They're predictable.
Yeah.
And they're very often sitting right underfoot.
Right.
I mean, we're so conditioned by movies and the evening news to look for these giant earth-shattering threats. But the data paints a completely different, much more insidious picture of what actually goes wrong when humans interact with a physical work environment.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a massive stack of construction and workplace safety documents, and we're decoding the anatomy of everyday accidents for you. Our mission here isn't to just, read a safety manual out loud. We want to understand the surprising human behaviors, the psychological traps, and the environmental setups that lead to these injuries. And, crucially, we want to look at the vital measures used to control them. Okay, let's unpack this because it's a lot.
It is a lot. And to do this properly, we are pulling from the hard data gathered by the Health and Safety Executive, or the HSE.
Right, the official numbers.
Exactly. Looking at their enforcement notices and injury reports, it really helps separate the myths of workplace danger from the very real statistical hazards on a live site. The numbers just demand that we rethink where the actual threats live.
Which, brings us right back to the ground. Because statistically, simply walking across flat ground is one of the most perilous things you can do during a shift, which sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy, but the HSE data shows that slips and trips together account for over 30% of non-fatal injuries in UK construction every single year.
Over 30%, that is a staggering portion of the injury pie.
It's massive. When inspectors walk onto a site, trip hazards are consistently one of the most frequently cited issues. We're talking about trailing cables, unexpected obstructions, loose materials, uneven ground.
Just everyday stuff.
Yeah, and the danger lies in the fact that these aren't permanent features of the building, right? They are the dynamic debris of a working day.
Ah, I see.
Like a cable that wasn't there at 9 a.m. suddenly stretches across a main walkway at 10:15 because, well, a new contractor started a task.
Right, the environment is constantly shifting. And the sources highlight a specific note that really caught my eye. They say missing risk assessments contribute to roughly 20% of all slip, trip, and fall incidents in UK construction.
Yeah, that 20% figure is telling.
But, I struggle to see how a piece of paper on a clipboard prevents someone from twisting their ankle on a rogue piece of timber, The paperwork itself doesn't sweep the floor.
No, it doesn't. But think of a risk assessment less like a bureaucratic form and more like the choreography for a complex theater production.
Okay, choreography. I like that.
If the director doesn't map out exactly where the props are going to be placed, where the heavy cables for the lighting will run, and where the actors need to exit before the stage goes dark, well, people are going to collide.
They're going to trip over each other.
Exactly. A proper risk assessment forces the site manager to physically choreograph the space. It dictates that, hey, the heavy-duty 220-volt cable cannot be routed through the primary egress path.
Right.
And that the waste timber must have a designated skip rather than just, being tossed to the side.
It's like navigating a toddler's playroom in the dark, right? Except instead of stepping on a plastic block and cursing, you're tripping over a heavy-duty trailing cable with real consequences.
That is a perfect analogy, yes.
So the paper is just the artifact of the planning process, but the actual countermeasure they emphasize is housekeeping, which they frame in a way that goes far beyond just, tidying up at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. Housekeeping in this context is a continuous metabolic process of the site. It is not a Friday afternoon sweep with a broom.
Right.
It requires rigorous, constant management of the physical space, keeping routes clear, using proper storage, maintaining tidy work areas. All of that has to be treated with the exact same level of engineering respect as the load-bearing walls of the structure itself.
Wow.
The moment you treat the walkway as a secondary concern, the environment instantly becomes hostile.
That's a perfect setup for the next major hazard. Because if we think about this in terms of physics and energy, trips on the ground are high frequency, relatively low energy events.
Correct.
But when we look up, we transition into high severity, high energy events, falls from height.
Yeah, and falls from height remain officially identified in these documents as one of the most serious, life-altering hazards in the construction industry.
The margin for error just completely disappears.
It really does.
Yeah.
A fall from scaffolding or from a ladder, it often happens simply because workers are operating without proper guardrails or without tying off their safety harnesses.
See, here's what I don't get about that. Evolution has hardwired the human brain to be terrified of heights, right?
Yeah.
If falling from a 3-story scaffold is an obvious existential threat, why are experienced professionals skipping the guardrails? Why are they unclipping the harness when they know the stakes?
What's fascinating here is the psychology of habituation.
Habituation.
Yeah, it is rarely a conscious death wish or some overt rebellion against safety rules.
Mm-hmm.
When a person works at height routinely, day in and day out, their brain literally habituates to the threat.
Really? It just stops caring.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
The amygdala, which is the part of the brain that sounds the alarm for fear, it stops firing the way it did on day one. The brain essentially says, well, we've done this 1,000 times, nothing bad happened, let's save some cognitive energy and just ignore the drop.
Wow. So the fear response just fades out entirely over time.
It fades out, and it gets replaced by the friction of the safety equipment.
Hmm.
Think about it. A fall arrest harness can feel cumbersome. Clipping in and unclipping every single time you move 10 feet, it slows you down. Setting up a proper guardrail might take 45 minutes for a task that only takes 10 minutes to actually complete.
Right, so it's a math equation for them.
Exactly. In a high-pressure environment where deadlines are tight and time is literally money, human nature naturally prioritizes immediate efficiency over a threat that no longer feels real to them.
Your own brain tricks you into prioritizing convenience over survival because the danger feels abstract.
Which is exactly why the safety controls outlined in the sources, they cannot rely on a worker's internal sense of fear. It doesn't work.
Because the fear is gone.
Right. The measures demand objective, procedural compliance to override that psychological habituation. You must use secure platforms. You must wear fall arrest equipment. And, crucially, there must be regular, logged maintenance.
So not just putting it on, but checking it.
Yes. You don't just use a ladder. You physically inspect the ladder for, hairline fractures and warped rungs before every single use.
Yeah.
You have to force the brain to engage the safety process mechanically.
It's fascinating that our brains turn off the fear of heights to save energy, but that same desire to save energy, like cutting corners, taking the quickest route, is exactly what destroys our physical bodies back down on the ground.
It's all connected.
Let's look at the biomechanics of manual handling, because this section of the safety documents is surprisingly dense.
It is. Poor manual handling is incredibly pervasive. It occurs anytime someone is lifting, moving, or carrying heavy loads incorrectly.
Yeah.
And the long-term damage it causes is massive.
Yeah, the sources point to things like straining a back while lifting a stack of bricks or moving a long, awkward piece of timber.
And it's not always just the weight itself.
Right, the twisting motion seems to be the primary culprit here. They specifically call out twisting awkwardly while carrying a load. What is actually happening inside the body when someone does that?
It really comes down to the biomechanical limitations of the human spine. The vertebrae and the intervertebral discs, they are incredibly strong when dealing with vertical compression.
So straight up and down.
Exactly. If you are standing straight up, your spine can support a significant amount of downward weight. But the spine is structurally vulnerable to shear forces.
Shear forces.
Yeah, shear forces happen when you introduce sideways rotation or twisting while under a heavy load.
So it's not just the sheer weight of the timber, it's the geometry of the movement.
The geometry is everything. When you lift a heavy object and twist your torso to set it down, rather than moving your feet to turn your whole body, you are applying intense, uneven pressure to the gel-like center of your spinal discs.
Oh, that sounds painful.
It is. That shear force creates micro-tears, which eventually lead to herniation. So the controls the sources mandate are all rooted in altering this physical geometry.
Like what?
They require correct lifting techniques, so keeping the load close to your center of gravity, and utilizing mechanical aids like carts or hoists to let machines absorb the shear forces instead of your back.
And team lifts too, right?
Absolutely. Insisting on team lifts for awkwardly shaped objects is a major control.
Okay, so we've covered the environment betraying you and your own physical shortcuts attacking your joints. But there is a third category of hazard here that is entirely behavioral.
Yes, the human element.
I was looking through the safety logs, and right next to things like unstable scaffolding and high-voltage cables, there is an entire section dedicated to horseplay.
I know, it sounds absurd to see it in a formal safety document, but horseplay is a heavily documented cause of severe accidents.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we're talking about practical jokes, pushing, running, throwing tools. My first reaction was, wait, are adult professionals actually throwing tools at each other on a live site to the point where the HSE has to regulate it?
They absolutely are.
Seriously?
Yes, and you have to look at the psychological environment of a construction site to understand why.
Okay, make it make sense.
Well, construction is physically demanding, obviously, but it frequently involves long periods of highly repetitive, monotonous tasks. Routine breeds boredom, and boredom is the enemy of attention.
So a worker throwing a hammer to a colleague isn't malice, it's just self-stimulation, like a way to break up the monotony of the shift.
Exactly. It usually starts as simple camaraderie. Someone tosses a tool to a mate instead of walking it over just to save 10 seconds and have a laugh. The problem is the context.
Right.
On a site filled with heavy machinery, open edges, trailing cables, and uneven ground, the margin for error is zero. When you throw a tool or push someone as a joke, you are introducing unpredictable kinetic energy into a space that requires absolute total control.
If the guy steps backward to catch that hammer, he might trip over the cable we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
Or, step backward off the unguardrailed scaffold. The kinetic energy interacts with the environmental hazards.
All these hazards are deeply interconnected, which is why the safety measure for horseplay isn't just putting up a sign that says no running.
Right, a sign won't fix human nature.
No, the documents emphasize maintaining professionalism. This is a cultural control. Supervisors have to foster an environment where focus on the task is what gets celebrated, and where fooling around is culturally rejected by the peer group itself.
Because the team understands the physical stakes.
Precisely.
That brings us to the underlying architecture of everything we've talked about so far. The cables on the floor, the missing guardrails, the spinal shear forces, the kinetic energy of horseplay. None of these happen in a vacuum.
No, they don't.
They happen when systemic safety nets fail. The documents point heavily to the preventative preparation that creates that invisible shield around the workers, specifically risk assessments and training.
And this is where the data gets incredibly sobering. The sources reveal a staggering statistic. In the period of 2024 to 2025, around 40% of enforcement notices issued to UK construction companies by the HSE involved inadequate or missing risk assessments.
Wait, 40%. Let me make sure I'm understanding that scale. Almost half the time the government has to step in, halt work, and legally enforce a safety standard, it is because a company fundamentally skipped or botched the planning phase.
That is the reality on the ground, yeah. A lack of proper risk assessments means that serious, life-threatening hazards are simply not identified before the work even begins.
That's terrifying.
The sources specifically mention scenarios like a worker starting a task without anyone checking for unstable ground beneath them, or failing to identify live overhead cables.
You're just walking blind onto a minefield because nobody bothered to map it out.
Exactly. And the critical countermeasure here isn't just writing the assessment once. It is the regular review of that assessment.
Because things change.
A construction site is a living, breathing entity. It changes daily. A risk assessment done on a Monday might be completely obsolete by Wednesday.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if heavy rain rolls in on Tuesday night, the soil mechanics change. The trench that was completely safe to work near on Monday might be highly susceptible to collapse on Wednesday due to the water weight and soil destabilization.
Oh, wow.
If the assessment isn't updated to reflect that rain, the controls fail.
Sitting right alongside that dynamic risk assessment is the training. The texts are very clear that a lack of training directly leads to unsafe practices, particularly the misuse of tools and heavy machinery.
Oh, for sure.
They give examples of operators running machinery without knowing the mandatory safety checks, or workers trying to lift materials without understanding the spinal mechanics we just discussed.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, training and risk assessments are the foundational software that makes all the physical hardware of a safe site actually function.
The software and the hardware, I like that.
You cannot have effective housekeeping if you haven't explicitly trained your team on what a safe, compliant walkway looks like. You cannot expect workers to use a fall arrest harness if they haven't had a proper induction on how to inspect its clips for metal fatigue.
It provides the why behind the what. The controls listed are thorough induction training, constant supervision, and regular refresher sessions. And that last one seems vital, given what we learned about how the brain habituates to heights.
Absolutely.
The refresher session acts as like a hard reset for the complacency meter.
It does. The paperwork, the inductions, the daily toolbox talks, these things often get a bad reputation on sites as bureaucratic red tape. They're seen as annoying hurdles before the real work begins.
Right.
But the data unequivocally shows that when you skip the red tape, the physical controls on the site immediately begin to degrade.
So what does this all mean for you? We started this deep dive looking for the dramatic, earth-shattering threats, but what the sources reveal is that workplace safety is a constant, active, daily battle against mundane friction.
It really is.
It requires the relentless physical diligence of housekeeping to manage trailing cables. It requires the procedural discipline to override our own psychological complacency when working at heights. And it requires an understanding of biomechanics to protect our spines, the cultural professionalism to avoid injecting unpredictable energy into a dangerous space, and the systemic dedication to continuous risk assessments.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And reviewing all of this leaves us with a critical, somewhat provocative concept to ponder.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you look at the entirety of these documents, the vast majority of accidents and enforcement notices are tied to the most basic failures. Trips over cables, missing paperwork, and a lack of foundational training.
Right, the mundane stuff.
This implies that most danger isn't created by unpredictable, freak acts of nature. It's created by the normalization of deviance.
The normalization of deviance.
Yeah, it is the slow, creeping acceptance of small anomalies, accepting the messy walkway, ignoring the unclipped harness just this once until disaster inevitably strikes.
The moment you accept the trailing cable as normal, the accident timer has already started ticking.
Exactly. So the question we have to ask ourselves, the thing to really mull over long after you finish listening, is this.
Okay.
Can we ever engineer a work environment or write a safety protocol so physically foolproof that it entirely eliminates human error? Or will ultimate safety always, at the end of the day, rely on the fragile, fluctuating foundation of human attention and mindset?
Wow, that is a heavy question to take back to whatever environment you work in. It turns out the real catastrophic failure isn't made of dynamite and collapsing steel. It's made of boredom, skipped paperwork, and a messy floor. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious out there, and above all, stay safe. Catch you next time.